keen to link up with some of the ZEF aspects, and I would suggest 3 rounds of 3 times up. Please go ahead.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sure.
Okay, currently the issue of agriculture as a driver for deforestation. When you talk about prairies, but in a developing countries in the tropics, deforestation is one of the big issues.
Right.
And there's 2 pathways that they're saying, either intensification or extensification. I just want to know your point of view about it, because that's a debatable issue right now.
Now, are
Wes,
you?
can we connect?
Yeah.
Can we always connect?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
That it's collective.
So hard.
Okay, I'll try to remember that question. I got it.
You
I
want
got
to
it.
sheet of
I'm on
paper,
it.
you can scratch out some notes.
Yeah, no, I'm on it. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, thank you for a great talk. I've been kind of a lifelong fan of your work, so it's really great that you're now here at the institute where I'm at. I'm actually from Portland, Oregon originally, so I grew up with a lot of the same, ideas that you're familiar with. And now, I'm working in the tropics, so everything's been changed around.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've had to come to terms with is the fact that although I support very much all the ideas that are basically embedded in this permaculture movement, what I find problematic is the fact that we still have whether we like it or not, we have a concept of agrobiodiversity. It's essentially all of those annuals out there will already represent part of our communal biodiversity. And these are all the rice and wheat and maize and sorghum crops that are actually grown traditionally and have different flavors, different cultural uses. And how do we slowly move those out of the system without dealing with the social component that comes along with it? And how do we deal with the fact that flavors, tastes, all those things are very personal, and breeders have no idea really how to deal with that? How can you or anybody in a laboratory decide what tastes good to a farmer in the tropics or to a community that has grown certain subsets of annuals, unfortunately, for now hundreds of thousands of years? So it's a time consideration, and especially when you say something like green revolution for the future, that brings in this idea of, we want a few varieties that will very quickly change the world. And a few varieties is the worry. I mean, I like those varieties, but it's a few of them that I'm concerned about.
Do I keep going?
Well, we have one more. We could take one more, but
Okay.
yeah, please.
It's rather a technical question. It's about the genetic drift. You are rescuing. I understood that by your training you are a geneticist.
Yeah.
So you are taking the basic crossbreeding and these traditional tools that have been pretty well by the Korean Revolution. But what I find a risk. What about you will produce some let's call hybrids? I don't know how to call them.
Yeah.
Let's call hybrids, and those hybrids they have this therefore hybrid vigor. And what will happen with the improved hybrids you have generated in 30 years? They will drift back to the ancestors, and I don't know which of the ancestors it will be, and therefore the aim that you will you got the thought when you develop it, when you propose it, the hybrid will probably be shifted, will fade.
Well,
And I find it is a bit tricky. Therefore, you will need a machine to keep feeding the system with new hybrids. So it will be a revolution, or a revolution tool, a new version with different type of plants.
can I handle his first? Because it's the easiest. Genetic drift is a reality at the population level. In other words, if you are turning your generations over through genetic recombination every year, that's true. But if you have a population of perennials that have been planted, this plant, same genotype, will be coming up next year, and next year, and next year. It's not involved in genetic recombination except in the formation of seeds, and you're not planting the seeds back, you're eating the seeds. So you're absolutely right about the problem of drift and in a population that's turning over every year. But I suspect on our prairies that we have plants that are older than the redwood trees. You know, so it'll be several years that those same genotypes will be at work, and they won't be drifting back. It's the same genotype, you know, 10 years from now or whatever.
I mean, it's cloning.
What?
It's cloning.
Yeah, that's de facto. It's cloning because it keeps coming up from the root every year.
So it means that every time somebody will try to replicate your systems, have to get your improved hybrid.
Well, we'll give them some of our seed. I mean, our main idea in all of this is to democratize seed production, one of the main ideas. So you take seed from this plant that has given us the high yields, and I suspect that we'll continue to work for, say, increased yield or resistance to pests or whatever.
But it will stop the evolution. It will stop evolution. No crossbreeding, no RLCs.
Well, let's look at it from the point of view of a farmer. Here is a farmer out.
It's not a long-term thing. You were at the beginning proposing something long-term, but it's short-term.
No, it's long. Well, I consider 1 year to be short-term. And I'll consider 10 years or 15 years or 20 years to be long enough term that at least you don't have soil erosion every year.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Okay. So are you satisfied?
Yes, yes.
Good. Now, I have to deal with these other two. Yeah, the part about taste. And I said a sustainable green revolution. And I have some flour over here that I'm not going to give you.
Tastes good, I'll take your word.
I have some flour here that I already promised to some folk. But this is our kernza, a perennial grain, and the nutritional profile in here, first of all, it's superior in my view to wheat. It's low in gluten, unfortunately. Now, so if you want to make bread out of it, you're going to have to cross it, mix some wheat flour. But now, I realize nobody will tell you that your baby is ugly. But we have had only praise for this flour as being superior to other flour.
In taste.
And in taste. In taste. And you all, some people can't tell the difference. So we're talking about perennial wheat, perennial rice, perennial corn. Those aren't big deal problems. So,
but the question is not about the superiority. There's no one spectrum of flavor. You know, everybody tastes it different.
yeah.
Especially,
well, then they'll have to develop their own varieties. Meanwhile, we've got a bunch of young people that would love to start and build a sustainable green revolution and end soil erosion and chemical contamination and fossil fuel dependency. So those are details.
But it isn't just a detail. The chart that Wes showed about the clusters around the world, we're not expecting that at the Land Institute we'll develop everything that goes out all over the world, only to develop the techniques that will be exported so that at those clusters, the grains that are useful in that place and specific to the interests of those people will be developed by them.
Yeah, there are the places around the planet, you know.
well, but the argument is you would need essentially an infinite number of clusters because the current agrobiodiversity is so huge, and the flavors between southern China and Southeast Asia are huge. You know, I mean the differences.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, let's give up. Let's just keep going like we're going. Let's just keep going like we're going. You know, more industrialization of agriculture, more soil erosion, more chemical contamination. You know, we can't do everything all at once. These are going to have to be solved in a lot of places, and one of our lines is elegant solutions predicated on the uniqueness of place. All adaptation is local. So, the first thing, though, is to get the perennial grain. Get it. Now, there's enough genetic variation in order to get the specificities for whatever taste somebody may have in mind or some group has in mind. But what we've got to stop is this idea that there's only one way, and that's the way of the last 10,000 years. And that begins that idea that nature being subdued or ignored that goes into all aspects of civilization now. So, that's all I'm going to say about that. Intense versus, now are you talking about forestry?
Tropical forest and deforestation. I mean, agriculture is being the drivers now of deforestation in the tropics. And because of the population increase, we need food security, then they're thinking which one should be the pathway, should be extensification or intensification.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the argument that the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report advanced, and yeah. So they've surrendered. The ecologists, most of them, have surrendered to the idea of more fertilizer, more pesticides, more irrigation in order to save the wild biodiversity. They've surrendered. I'm arguing is maybe in the short run surrender is necessary, but if we will build the perennial grains that can be grown in mixtures, we won't have the soil erosion that contributes to the encroachment upon the wild biodiversity. So it can be conservation as a consequence of production, not either conservation or production. So you see what I mean? So I can't answer for any particular place, but I can say that we need to be able to think about the possibility of the conservation as a consequence of production. I mean, it is one of the problems about the time. Now, from where I sit, a long ways from where you're sitting, or where you are from, I would say in order to save the wild biodiversity, if I'm forced into a decision right now, intensify the fertilizer, intensify the pesticides, pour it on. But I say that in the same way that I would say if I've got a serious cancer, give me the chemotherapy. But it's chemotherapy, and it's dealing with a sickness. It's one of the signs of the sickness of landscapes, as well as the planet that's got too dang many people. So, I mean, all sorts of emergencies we're forced into. The Haber-Bosch process, use the natural gas as the fertilizer, you know, for the Haber-Bosch process, use natural gas for that. But get a contingency plan. That's one reason I mentioned the both that are working for the here and now. We need those working for the long term, so that 30 years from now, we're not forced to face some of the same questions we're facing today. You see what I mean? Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to let my kids starve. or my grandkids. I'm a human.
Are there more questions? Comments?
I've got some papers up here about this is a paper that was published in Science, which you might look at.
So Wes, you mentioned that you have difficulties with the graduates planning work.
Yeah.
Very pragmatic question.
Right.
What did you do?
What do? You go to the U.S. Department of Agriculture and say, we need a 50-year farm bill that will hire these people to work on long-term research projects. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture will put a little bit of language in there saying, yes, we need perennial grains. But the modern mind is probably the mind that humans have always had. We don't work on long-term solutions. I mean, the hunter-gatherer did not have to think about 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. The hunter-gatherer had to be pretty alert here and now. And did not have the instruments of destruction that are fueled by fossil carbon. So, so we're requiring a stretch of the Paleolithic mind. And that's what we hope that this next generation will see, is that we're essentially bankrupt for ideas in the modern industrial context. I mean, I think we're seeing already that the low-hanging fruit from Monsanto has been got. You know, Monsanto had to get a $60 million infusion of money from somewhere else. So that's bankrupt. But what they're going to do is come back and figure out some ways to keep that system going. We've got to have young people that will allow themselves to go beyond here and now in their thought processes, and that may require some different set of politics than what we've historically had. You know, I mean, it's like the question she puts, what are you going to do? You know, if you've got your kid out there, and are you going to let the kid go hungry in the interest of saving the forest?
Yes, I have been thinking when I was listening. I think that this speech was extremely important because it provides one instrument. We need to take care that we not solve situations with one instrument, but we have the instrument. And this is a very important issue. If we have this new instrument, we can put together several issues. One is strategies for fighting against traditional ways of producing. We need at the same time to cut other consumption because it's part of the project. I think that this is the most important things of your contribution, is that we can organize as systems of different elements. Isolately, we cannot do nothing with one instrument. But if we put this instrument jointly with these different instruments and working together, because we need to fight. Monsanto is not innocent, but each country has their own organism for approving pesticides, for approving GMOs. Thus, we have plans for fighting, and we are fighting. I think that this is the complement of the instrument. We have the instrument. I think that this is very important because it's very difficult to fight when you don't have instruments, and now I like it, your view, because we have in our hands one instrument, but this instrument needs a strategy of fighting, and strong fighting, because we are in war, where it's not a peaceful process. And I think this is the importance of this contribution. And I think that the challenge is not only people for managing this new instrument, but it's also the commitment of people for fighting. That means for organizing fights against the traditional ways of thinking, and also the traditional ways of producing PhDs, because this is part also of the problem. For me, this is a morning of hope.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Raul, I agree. I do think what did I do? Where did it? Oh, there. That humans are embedded, and we had our evolution within ecosystems. And my view is that the ecosystem concept carries with it more solutions that are sort of natural solutions. For example, the issue of social justice within various societies. And what we saw in the last Green Revolution was that they were focused on bushels and acres. And they got them. Some of my buddies went to help make that. I mean, we were graduate students. And we were young and full of, you know, well, most of them. I didn't go out to make the Green Revolution. You know, I did something else. But they were successful in their mission. And that was to get a large number of bushels per acre and paid no attention to the fact that they were going to have to, in India and other places, Mexico, take out credit to buy fertilizer, pesticides, farm machinery, put in irrigation wells. And as a consequence, if there was a crop failure, they lost their farms. And we had more latifundia. So it seems to me that inherent within the ecosystem concept is social justice. In that, who's not going to be interested? The seed houses, the fertilizer people, the pesticide people, the farm machinery people. The reward goes to the farmer and the landscape rather than the suppliers of inputs. That is social justice embedded within an ecosystem concept. You see, so the fight that, a lot of the fight we have, it seems to me, Raul, is the consequence of us being that species that is effectively outside that ecosystem. In other words, we're going to do something to that acreage. And one of the worst words that was ever invented is the word environment. It's a word we ought to get rid of. Now, my first book was called Man and the Environment. Only two things wrong with the title, Man and the Environment. And that was in 1970, so forgive me. But the idea of environment is that it is out there and we're going to do something for it. It's like it's part of our heritage. Whereas, and another word we ought to get rid of is biosphere, which carries a bio-bias. It's an ecosphere that includes the physical as well as the biological, and because we place such emphasis on the bio with a bio-bias, then we play fast and loose with that which is not living. Witness an atmosphere for a dumping ground. For carbon, CO2. We'll just dump our CO2 there. We'll burn our fossil carbon and dump our CO2 there. Well, that atmosphere is a part of the ecosphere. So this has the potential for humans to finally see that they are embedded within the physical and I mean, imagine this. Let's say we could make ourselves small enough to go inside a cell. And we're so small that we have to have binoculars to look around inside a cell. And if we see a crystal, we say, well, that's not living. But if we see things doing this, we say, oh, that's living. But you step outside the cell, you see the whole thing is alive. Just so with the ecosphere. So two things. Get rid of the word environment and get rid of the word biosphere. Embrace the ecosystem as a major source of you know, everything from social justice to saving the soil. Now that doesn't mean the battle then will come in getting people to see that our solution does not lie here. Now we use molecular markers. We don't do any gene splicing. But we use molecular markers, but it's in the service of the ecosystem. You see what I mean? Yeah. Okay. There's one more.
One comment, but then we have to slowly finish.
Regarding to what you're saying about the ecosystem, I would agree with you, but I think it will be a long process because recently we still appreciate being disciplinary, like in academic world who are researchers,
yeah.
But it's just recently that we are looking at really being interdisciplinary, and it's like the science of that is just at infantile stage.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the, I think not the word environment or not the word biosphere, but the way the researchers are working together and the way they're thinking is one of the challenges.
Yeah, well, that's right. And I'll just say this one thing in response to that. We've got to force knowledge out of its categories. And the way to force knowledge out of its categories is to quit featuring what universities are now doing and start featuring questions that go beyond the available answers. As long as we're asking questions that have answers, chances are they're the wrong questions. They're coming out of the industrial mind. And by featuring those questions that don't have answers, now the knowledge begins to flow out of the categories. And we can now begin a kind of a yeasty, different way of thinking about the world. So I'll stop.
That is a very nice closing statement.
Yeah. Yeah.